You never know when cheating might happen in your life. In my case, I never would have guessed that it would happen right outside our house at the bus stop where I happened to walk in. But what I saw left me shocked and made me think about how well I know my wife. You definitely don't want to miss this story. I was 25 years old at the time, and so was this woman. However, her 25 turned out to be quite uneven for my same age. She had a divorce and a young son by the time she was 25. I, on the other hand, by that age, had only had a car. I had no kids and no divorce. Anyway, I'll quickly rewind the tape and say that we kind of started dating. I liked her above all for her mature and measured attitude to life. Going out to nightclubs and so on didn't seem to interest her. She worked at a pretty good job, order at home, everything for the baby, and so on. In general, I admit honestly that I, looking at all this at the time, suddenly wanted that in my life, too, came to order. I wanted to land and, as they say, be a decent person too. But as I realized afterwards, it was after such thoughts that I was almost taken warmly. "Let's you stay with us," said Tanya one evening, when I once again visited them. And then my first mistake was to go to my friend's territory, not to take her to my place. And lest we become living at my place, I asked her. And it turned out that her house kind of has more rooms. The baby is much closer to the daycare there. Plus, she's been going to her usual gym there near her house for a few years. Okay, well, I moved out. And from then on, the sensitive and affectionate mode shifted a bit to a mode with questions and demands. Since we met, almost 6 months had passed. And I by this time, in fact, already in full behavior as a husband. After all, the attitude, I thought, does not depend on the wedding. A wedding, you could say the middle of a relationship, but certainly not the beginning. My point is that at this point, I had already introduced myself as a husband. I do all sorts of little things around her house, take off work when she's not able to pick up the baby, pay for everything, and so on. And for all this, here is started in my life, an unexpected life, I completely forget to ask her. Well, where and how, in fact, is now your first former husband? Of course, when we met her, she told me something about him in passing. But to discuss our relationship with me, she liked it 3 times more than the divorce. So we didn't talk to her too much about it. But no matter how much rope to see, and the end still happened. And a series of events still forced me to eventually get away from this Tatiana. So once she and I started talking about the gym, to which she goes with regularity for several months. It's far away, I ask her, I should also start getting ready for spring. As long as it's fall here, and then winter, just in time for summer to get myself back in shape. Give me the address. And it turned out that there is no gym near our house, and she hasn't been going to one in recent weeks. So why'd you tell me you've been working out for a long time? I asked her. I wanted to impress you, as if you men don't do that. I see, no gym, and then more. Then the first fight that ensued when I apparently asked her a question out of rank. Well, even funnier was her response. She has a smart home system at home. Well, you can control the appliances through your cell phone. I picked up my phone, and it was out of juice. I quickly turned on the device I needed and quickly put my mobile on the charger. Now the device had to be turned off. I take Tatiana's iPhone, and there is a password. Another second, she comes into the room, she saw a cell phone in my hands, and almost piggyback squealing, grabbed the phone and snatched it, almost dropping it on the floor. Tanya, you're normal. What do you keep there that's so important that it's worth protecting? It's my space, it's mine, and that's it. She left for the kitchen, and I noted this prank inside me. About 15 minutes later, she came back and handed me her cell phone. No offense, it's just the way I was brought up. She told me through her teeth, but of course that excuse was not enough for me. Her cell phone that I did not take, and this case for myself remembered. And it turned out that not for nothing. In the meantime, as I said, autumn has come, and the next call for me was the rainy weather. My schedule at work is irregular. I can leave in the morning, much earlier than her. I can leave later and the same in the evening. I can be home at 3 o'clock, and sometimes I can only get to bed by midnight. On one such day, I called the future wife of the unsuccessful Tatiana and quickly took the child from kindergarten at 4 was with him at home. It was raining outside, and we were expecting Tanya home at about 6. When that time came, Tanya came home. We met her. I took her bags from the doorstep. I looked and there was hardly a drop on her square. "Do you take a cab there or what?" I asked her. "The bus. What do I need a cab for?" I looked at the probe, hanging in the check room. It was in its case, and of course dry. If it hadn't been for that incident with the phone, I wouldn't have paid any attention to the rain or the umbrella. But in our case, I did pay attention. Never mind, never mind. A few more weeks go by, she comes home dry again. "Tanya, I'm not hinting at anything. Let's you better tell me how this can be and all," she laughs. "The bus, my dear fellow, can stop not only at bus stops, but also on demand, not far from our doorstep. I just walked not from our bus stop, but I asked and the driver stopped right there. We really lived near the terminus of one of the city buses. And apparently, since this area in town was still new, indeed one of the stops was quite far away, and the next stop was already the terminus. But the fact that the big buses here, like cabs, would drop off and pick up anyone on the way, well, something was wrong somehow. But it's like not caught and not a thief, but only until caught. And I did catch her in the end. In general, one day I arrive at home at night. Of course, there's no free parking at that time. And it's not just by the house. There's none in sight of the human eye. I spent half an hour near the yard, just bumping into the curb in hope to find a pocket. The closest place for the car turned out to be almost at the bus terminus. I couldn't see it from our window, and I certainly wouldn't have left the car there at any other time. But there wasn't much to choose from today. I parked there, closed the car, and headed off to the side. The next day, I was supposed to be home all the time. The baby stayed with me that day too. And in the evening I remembered, damn, I have my car parked there, God knows where. Then, and under the window of free space freed up a bunch. In general, began to gather. The child asked to go with me. Let's go. I take him with me. I take the keys to the car, and we go to the terminal to move my car closer. I get the power in my car, warmed up, and start pulling out on the road to turn around. And there's a marking, 2 solid lanes. The nearest U-turn is the bus terminus, but it's a 20-second drive at most. Without a second thought, I got on the road, reached the terminal, turned around, and saw the driver get out of the bus, which was standing at the bus stop, with some things in his hands, and go to the cabins, where the drivers were sitting. I got out of the car, took her son by the hand, and we walked towards the door of the tent. As we approached, we looked inside. My wife was sitting on the driver's arm, and the one I was leading by the hand broke out of my hands and ran inside with a yell of "Daddy." So I'm standing there wondering what to do. Everyone is silent. And everyone, as I understand it, is clear. Our daddy is the driver of one of those buses. Now, I know what kind of kind driver he is, who almost every day breaks the bus in front of the door. But most of all, I was struck by the reaction, or rather the lack of it. I actually asked her if she was ashamed. She said that he was her ex-husband, and that the fate of this apartment and more depended on him. I quickly drove to her apartment and started packing. And then she finally opened up. As it turned out, everything without a signature for her is nothing. And she thinks the relationship can only start in a registry office. The fact that I invested completely in the family and in this her place, the fact that I almost changed my whole life for her benefit, it all does not matter. And without guarantees, as she put it, that is, without a stamp in the passport, she can do whatever she wants. And certainly, as she put it, with the birth father of her child. In short, such an inadequate experience is enough to last me a lifetime. And now I'm sitting here thinking, what if we had lived at my place? And the end of this one, I never would have shown up. How many months, or maybe years, to figure out all of her fun? She certainly would not have told me, because for her it is normal. Second story. Did you ever feel like there was something wrong with your marriage? I too thought we were doing fine until one day something happened that shattered my faith in our married life. I accidentally discovered my wife cheating on me, and it shook me to my core. But what happened next surprised even me. Do you want to know how I solved this situation and how my wife regretted her actions? Then stay with me for the rest of this video. I will omit how my wife and I once met. It doesn't have much relevance to my story, which, by all appearances, will be quite long as it is. I suggest listening to the whole story, as it were, to get a sense of what I felt during those months, as they say firsthand. Marina and I, in our late 30s, decided to move to a bigger city after we got married. This decision, of course, was not easy for us. The thing is that in our hometown, we already had some kind of connections, but still more or less running things, but my wife and I wanted to look at life with even more open eyes. Especially since in our dreams and areas of work wages are different here and there at times, and sometimes by almost 10 times. But it turns out that moving to a major city and doing all the same things we can live with his wife is very different from what we lived with her now. However, it didn't end up being as bright and colorful as she and I had imagined. She and I had small savings, which in this city would be enough for a year, well, or a little more. In general, look, Marina, the step that we decided to take, it is very serious. I suggested that she spend less, earn more, save, and so on. While we are getting settled here, and so to speak, getting accustomed and getting up, we decided that we will not have children yet. It doesn't take much time for that question, so once we're on our feet, I thought it wouldn't be an issue for sure. She agreed with me at the time, but not for long, as it turned out. The lights, as they say in the big city, did their job, and I began to hear from her requests for trips to clubs, demands for entertainment, and requests for expensive and inconsequential shopping, and other trivial crap. You and I had an agreement. No, I asked her. But I did not get any intelligible answers from her. She, by the way, also got a job, worked right from the doorstep as a senior manager, and helped in one firm to lead, albeit informally, but almost an entire line of work. I am telling you the details of her work for a reason. A few more months passed, and then the first surprise. I walked into the room where she usually sits at her laptop in the evening, and I see her sitting on the city's social media page of this major city. Interested in local news? I asked her. I communicate with new people. It can be interesting in the comments here, my wife replied. It was the evening that I now consider as the beginning of our end. No one is forbidden to sit in the social network, and I, in vain that day, as it turns out, did not pay attention to it. A couple more months passed, and my wife suddenly started having problems at work. Because, as I told you, she was with the head of the undercarriage direction, responsible for this too, though perhaps informally, but as you have understood too, was it. One delayed once, then delayed twice, then delayed 3 times. I treated this with absolute calmness, because the main purpose, by agreement with the same wife, we had our career, well, and financial success. And for this reason, I did not reprimand her for these delays at all, but only until exactly one random moment. At the time, February 23rd was approaching. They were having some sort of corporate party at the office. This story is by no means about a corporate party, but the fact that it happened sobered me up a bit. Their firm was working that day, and just in the evening, they decided to get together and quickly congratulate all their men. Anyway, in the evening my wife calls me and asks me to pick her up somehow. I was still driving at the time and without question agreed. When I drove up to her, she said that her direct superior and his wife were here, and it would be good to get us all in here with each other, and just to reacquaint ourselves. I went over there, we sat down and talked a little bit, and their boss turned out to be quite an interesting character. And after their short corporate party, they suggested that we go to a restaurant nearby for an hour. He and his wife and I, to be honest, after work I was ready to go anywhere, but as long as there was food, so I agreed without question. We arrived, sat down to dinner. My wife does not drink and in general has not consumed today. Her boss basically offers, looking at me. But since my wife doesn't drink and she has rights, there's basically only one way out for me and you. To cut a long story short, we had a whiskey with him. Then some more. We went outside for 5 minutes. The boss kept praising my wife, and I just dropped a phrase. It seems like everything is fine, but as usual, if it's okay from work and you're not home for that reason for a long time, you're not happy at home right away. But if you stay home too long, they're not happy either. I thought this problem was only with men, but it turns out not, because my wife has the same problem. The boss asked me what I meant. I said, so I'm talking about all of her overwork. I'll soon begin to be jealous, or meet her from work and check where she was with whom and how long. The boss was surprised and told me that they hadn't had any overtime for the last 2 months, and in fact, they still don't. They don't have such a huge workload that they have to work day and night. Moreover, my wife has been working very recently, and there is certainly no such workload for the newcomers. I was embarrassed at that moment. This is the second time she has come in later than usual. Maybe it is unprofitable for the boss to justify himself to me. There are overtime, but he is silent on them. Well, either, or it is time to ask his wife. We had dinner with them that day. My wife Deep and Night drove us home. The next day, I started thinking about how I would find out the destination my wife was driving to. Asking her, while she was already answering me at work. Anyway, when she and I met in the kitchen again in the evening, I asked to see my phone so I could turn on something on YouTube. We started eating dinner. Watching the news on her phone, my wife put her plate in the sink and went into the other room. I took her cell phone and quickly went through her calls and messages. But there was nothing there, of course. A bunch of calls from unspecified numbers. It must be work. And in messengers again it was work, plus chit-chat with her friends from our hometown, the city. I was tempted to block her cell phone, but her voice from the next room prevented me from doing so. She yelled out to me that tomorrow, or the other day, she would have to go out again in the evening for work, maybe be late for dinner. Of course, I could have started to tell her that I knew all about her non-existent overtime, but there was little evidence, if there was any evidence to speak of. I started going through everything she had on her phone, and so I got to the cab app. And that's where I discovered something I had to calculate for the next week. There are several on the list of rides that are each more expensive than all the available ones, and all of them in the evening from obscure addresses almost out of town, and all ending in our driveway. So Marina would go somewhere during the day, and from that somewhere she would return to our house in the evening. I wrote down where the cab was called from and realized it was time for me to go there myself. The next day, I got in my car and drove to the place in the evening. And the fact that I drove in the evening was my mistake, but I didn't know about it at the time. I got to the point where the cab picked up my wife every time, and I went outside, but it was a clear field. It was dark all around, snow blowing in the wind. I made sure a couple of times, all right. I'm where my wife often is too. I got in the car and drove a little further. There were fields all around. I turned on a high beam and drove on the navigator. There was more and more snow under the wheels. It was already beginning to lightly creep around the bottom of my car. I saw the fence and the gate in the headlights, turned around, and drove to the house. As I drove up, my wife called me. "Where are you?" It's pretty late, and he's turning off his phone. Who's turning it off? I asked my wife again. I'm on my way up the stairs. We had dinner, went to bed, and a couple of days later she came home later than usual. I kept trying to figure out where she was going, so I took her cell phone again. And this time, I could not believe my eyes. It's the same spot I was at just a few days ago. Well, what, again, do I have to go there? I had already been there, I thought, but I decided to go there before dark. Maybe I would see something, and I saw something on my head. I went to the same place in the afternoon. Nothing had changed. The field. Again, I got my navigator on the phone and took the same single road further. Another fence, only this fence is too long and too high. I started to type the address into my phone to find out what kind of business it was. And then I saw that the network on my cell phone at the fence was not working here. No bars at all. I backed up and turning around near the gate, I see a sign on it. It's a prison. I turned around, drove a few dozen meters away, the connection reappeared. I passed the point where my wife usually waited for a cab, and then it suddenly hit me. She had nowhere else to go. That's why she took a cab every time from this far away point. In this varied establishment, it seems to be jammed, and there's no network reception as you'd expect. I had already decided to go and show it to my wife, but she would not admit it so easily. If I don't get it right here, she'll make excuses for any of my arguments. Unless, of course, I'm wrong in my calculations and suspicions here. Anyway, I remembered that she said she was going to be late again the other day. I thought, here we go, we'll wait for that day. One day later, I called her cell phone in the afternoon, and it was out of range. It's now or never, I thought that day. I got in my car and drove to an address I already knew well. I called again on the way so I wouldn't accidentally go there for nothing, but the phone was still disconnected. Sounds like she's out there somewhere. I drove up and stood a little farther away, where the gate lights didn't reach. I waited. And half an hour later, my wife actually came out. A couple more people came out with her, apparently relatives of those sitting inside. They got into the car and drove away. Well, Marina went down that road to this place, where there is still a connection. Apparently, to call a cab from there, as was her custom. I pulled up behind her, honked my horn, and she backed almost into the snowdrift. I took the left, stopped and got out of the car, shouted to her, "Hi, how are you here?" Asked my wife and I, without waiting for her other pointless questions. Told her that I knew about all her social networking activities, but also that there was and is no recycling. Of course, I had to lie a little, and I told her I had talked to a lawyer a few weeks ago, and he had found everything for me, and where she was going, and more importantly found out to whom. So no excuses, let her not even think about it. Told her to just answer why all this to her, and whether it is not a shame to run like this quietly, and in the evening to my face to deceive me. Anyway, she met him on social networking sites. Apparently, he is also married and works in such a wonderful institution. I do not know what it was that attracted her to him. Perhaps a different attitude to family values because children, as I understand it, he already has. But I think that look at the world even more open eyes, as she wanted, with a comrade she will not do soon.